What's up, booktube? Welcome back. My name is Laura if you're new here, and today we're going over all the books that I read in October. Spooky season has officially come to a close and I'm very sad about it. But I did get to read a whole bunch of wonderfully spooky Halloween reads and it was such a fun time. This month I read 12 books, which sounds like a lot, but literally half of those were graphic novels, which I was able to get through in like an hour each. So it's not actually as much reading as it seems. I've been kind of slumping in the last like 2 weeks or so a little bit, but I still read quite a few things that I really enjoyed. So let's just get right into it. For October, I read 2,126 pages, not including the book that I DNF'd because I'm not sure how many pages of that one I read, but I'll start with that book that I DNF'd. I ended up not finishing Hide and Seeker by Daka Hermon. This was really no fault of the book, but I had started it and I was really enjoying it, but then I got distracted with like other books for a little while, and then when I finally came back to Hide and Seeker, I had completely lost interest in it. I like tried to finish it and I just had no care to sit through the last like 2 hours of the audiobook. So I just DNF'd it, unfortunately. But let's move on to the books that I did manage to finish, and there are quite a few of them here, so I'm not going to spend too long talking about each of them. The first one is The Taking of Jake Livingston by Brian Douglas. This one is a YA paranormal horror. It's about a boy named Jake who's able to see ghosts, see their death loop, so he sees them die over and over and over again, of all these souls that have died and gotten stuck somehow and are unable to move on. Normally these ghosts don't ever talk to him, they just kind of replay their deaths over and over again, and that's the end of it, until one day this ghost named Sawyer starts terrorizing Jake, and he learns that Sawyer is actually the ghost of a school shooter who committed suicide. But now Sawyer, as a ghost from the afterlife, he wants revenge on all the people who hurt him, and he wants to use Jake to be able to do that. Obviously Jake is not willing to help him, and so Sawyer starts to terrorize him and to kill people around him to try and force Jake into helping him. So it's definitely a very heavy one. There are some very heavy topics talked about in this book, so definitely look up trigger warnings for this one before you go into it. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. I didn't dislike it. It wasn't like a bad book. It just wasn't quite what I wanted it to be. It wasn't as scary as I'd hoped. I found the first part to be a bit scarier when it was like setting up the atmosphere, but then it just kind of stopped being interesting for me personally. It was well written. I liked the characters. The relationships were very well done. It just didn't scare me, and I was hoping that it was going to. It was more so just disturbing. I don't personally like that kind of horror where it's just disturbing and makes you feel sick. I don't like that kind of thing. So this was not the book for me personally. After that, I had a few days off from work, so I decided to read a whole bunch of like fall themed fantasy graphic novels, which I did do a vlog for, so I will link that for you guys up above as well as down below. But the first one that I read was Garlic and the Vampire by Bree Paulsen. This was such a cute graphic novel. Oh my gosh. It's about this witch who is given sentience to a bunch of garden vegetables and fruits, and they tend to her garden for her and help her out at the market. And then one day they realize that the castle nearby is all of a sudden occupied when it hasn't been for a very long time, and the witch says that it's probably a vampire and he might be dangerous. So everybody volunteers Garlic to go and talk to the vampire and see what's going on, because obviously Garlic is going to be safe from the vampire, but Garlic is so anxious and like really self-conscious about, you know, being able to do things properly, and she's always worried that she's like letting people down and everything. So she does not want to go, but everybody is counting on her, so she goes and then learns that things are not what they seem. This was such a sweet one and I really enjoyed it, and this one I gave 4 stars. I recommend this one so highly. It was just lovely and adorable, and I loved the art style as well. I also read The Witch Boy by Molly Ostertag. This one kind of reminded me of Cemetery Boys a little bit. It's about this boy who is from this family of witches, and traditionally the women in the family get to be witches and learn magic, whereas the men are shapeshifters and they protect the family by fighting demons. The main character is a boy, but he has no interest in shapeshifting whatsoever. He wants to learn magic, but he is constantly told that he's not allowed to do that. This one was super sweet, and again, I loved the art style of it, and just the fact that it reminded me of Cemetery Boys was a huge plus for me. I also gave it 4 stars. I then read All My Friends Are Ghosts by S.M. Vidaurri. The title is pretty explanatory. It's about this kid who is being like bullied in school and everything, and so one day she runs away into the forest nearby and she runs into a pack of ghosts, and they all kind of realize she's lonely, so they take her in to try and become her friend and make her feel better, and they take her to their like ghost world thing to try and sneak into their ghost school, and they learn how to fight these creatures that that come from like lost souls of humans who had died, and then their souls get like really angry and turn into these horrible monsters. This one was wonderful as well. I love the friendships in here and the characters were hilarious. This one I gave 3.5, and it was my least favorite of the ones that I read for this little vlog, but it was still excellent and I do recommend it still. And then the last 2 graphic novels that I read for this vlog were Hexvet Volume 1 and 2 by Sam Davies. These ones were probably my favorites of the 5 that I read for this vlog. They were so sweet. It's a really simple premise. It's just about these 2 kids who are in training at the vet for witches. So they bring all of their like familiars and like magical creatures into the vet to be taken care of, and shenanigans ensue and things go terribly wrong and they have to deal with everything. It was just such a sweet story. Very simple. Like the plot is not overly developed, which is fine. It's mostly just like a cute character-based story, and then the art style was just adorable, and the animals in it just melted my heart. They were so cute. Very low stakes and just overall a fantastic time, and I gave both of them 4 stars each. Moving on from the graphic novels, I then read The Border Keeper by Tokuda-Hall. This is the first book in the McCallis cycle, I think it's called, which is a novella duology. This one was weird. It's really hard to explain what it's about. Basically, it like at least partially takes place in the desert, and this man like travels to this house at the very edge of the desert or something like that, where the border keeper lives, and the border keeper is the guard of the other realms. So she can like travel through the, I think it's the 999 realms of the spirit world, and like take people with her. The main character shows up to ask her to take him there, but he won't really tell her why. And there is so much happening in this tiny little book. It was very hard to follow, but it was super interesting. Honestly, plot-wise, I don't think I had a damn clue what was going on most of the time, but the world was so fascinating that I still had a really good time reading this one, because we like travel through all the worlds and everything, and we get to see how each realm is different from the last. I do wish that it had been a bit longer, or maybe even a full-length novel. That way we'd have more time to explore the worlds, because we really only got to see, I think, 3 or 4 of the realms, and I would have loved to have more time with them because they were so weird and unique and just really interesting. I would have loved to be able to spend more time there and like learn more about the lore. Each realm has its own different set of rules and like creatures there, and so it was super interesting, but it just wasn't long enough. And I think if it had been longer, then it wouldn't have been as confusing either, because it was definitely a lot to try and take in. I had to have the audiobook and the ebook at the same time because I could not follow either just by themselves. This is definitely one that you have to pay attention to, otherwise you are going to be so lost. Even if you are paying attention, you're still going to be lost, and like that is intentional. Like it's not meant to be this cohesive story, I don't think. It's part of the genre new weird, so like it's meant to be weird, but it was a lot. Still really good, and I'm definitely planning on reading book 2 once it's released. It was a wild time, and this one I gave 3.5 stars. Next up, I had an arc of Within These Wicked Walls by Lauren Blackwood, which was incredible. This was my favorite thing of the month. I gave it 5 stars. And this one is an Ethiopian-inspired fantasy horror retelling of Jane Eyre. This was a debut book and it blew me out of the water. It was just phenomenal. I loved this book. The writing was just so beautiful, and like, oh my god, the main character is what's called a Dettera, and her job is to go to places that have the evil eye curse on them and rid them of these curses. And the evil eye comes in forms of manifestations, which can take really any kind of form. For some examples, there was a closet in this house and the manifestation would whisper your darkest fears to you. There was one where this room fills up with blood and all these really creepy, beautifully gothic things. If you're a fan of Crimson Peak, you will love this book. It had very much the same vibes. But anyways, the main character gets hired for her first solo job at this mansion, and there have been 10 other Detteras there, and all of them have quit, and she is really like their last hope. So she goes and she's determined to do this, like her livelihood depends on it, so she really has no choice. And then she and the man with the curse end up falling in love as well, so it's a romance between those two as she's trying to deal with the evil eye and rid this house of this curse. This was just such a well put together book. It was so beautiful. It was creepy and atmospheric, and like just overall it was amazing. I can't get over how good it was, especially for a debut book. Like it was incredible. And like honestly, I could just sit here and just keep gushing about it, but like that's really all that I can say about it. It's just, it was amazing. I feel like for this book you should go into it not knowing too much about it and just kind of enjoy the ride. As a retelling of Jane Eyre, I have no idea how good it was as a retelling. I haven't ever read Jane Eyre or like adaptations of it, so I have no clue if it was like an accurate retelling of it or not. Obviously it's fantasy version, so it's not going to be exactly the same, but either way I have no idea like how closely it follows the original story. But regardless, I loved this book so much, and I'm just going to stop rambling about it now because I'm just going to keep repeating myself, but just pick this up because it like, wow. Next up was Silver in the Wood by Emily Tesh, which is the first book in the Green Hollow duology. This one was a lot of fun. It takes place in this really ancient wood where there is this legend of the Green Man who is the keeper of the wood. Our main character is actually the Green Man. He's been there for 400 years. He's seen more as like a myth than a legend, so people don't really know that he actually exists. But one day this folklorist comes to town and he is obsessed with the legend of the Green Man. But then he meets the main character and realizes that he just happens to know a whole lot of information about this legend, and the two of them end up bonding and also falling in love. Things go from there. Now, in terms of plot, it was pretty slow paced. It is a novella, so it's very, very short, but like not that much actually happens in it. It's a lot of like talking about the trees and the wood and all the fairy tale lore and everything like that. So it's definitely not a book for everybody, but I love that. I say frequently that like my favorite part of a book is the world building and the lore surrounding it. I love fairy tales because I love hearing about the world behind them, and I'm obsessed with like fairies and everything. So this book was really just excellent for me personally. I totally get why others wouldn't like it because really not that much happens. It's honestly just a lot of them sitting at a fire and talking about the folklores and stuff like that, which for me was excellent. So I love this one. The characters are really the best part of this one, and the atmosphere as well. And overall I ended up giving it 4 stars. Next up was Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw. This one was one of my most anticipated reads of the season, and unfortunately I didn't love it that much. I gave it 2.5 stars. It looks terrifying and it just didn't quite live up to that, unfortunately. So this one is about a group of friends. 2 of them are getting married and they wanted to get married at a haunted house. Rents out this like mansion in Japan that is known to be haunted, and they all go there to go and marry their friends. And then you can kind of imagine where things go from there. Now the atmosphere of this one was definitely like really creepy. I loved hearing all of the like Japanese lore, so that was really cool. But the main character was just so passive. Like she didn't seem like she cared about literally anything that was happening. She just felt like somebody who was watching things happening instead of somebody who was actually part of the terror of what was going on around them. It was very dry and it just felt like she was just observing everything. Even though there were all these like terrifying things happening, I didn't feel immersed into the plot whatsoever. So I didn't feel the fear that the characters were feeling. The writing was beautiful. It was so flowery and descriptive, which is a good thing usually, but in this case the writing was so pretty that the plot ended up getting lost in it. Like I had no idea what was going on most of the time because the writing was so flowery that I couldn't piece together what was going on in between all the description. So it was a little bit too nice, I guess. But either way, I'm sad about this one. It wasn't a bad book by any means, and I do want to reread it physically instead of the audiobook, because I think the audiobook really didn't help with like being able to keep up with what was happening. So I'm hoping that if I physically read it, maybe I'll like retain the information a bit better and it'll be better that way. But for the time being, it is 2.5 stars and I'm so sad about it. Alright, second from last, I've got Squad by Maggie Tokuda-Hall. This one is a werewolf graphic novel. It takes place at a high school where the new girl has just transferred there, and the like popular girls kind of adopt her into their little squad. And then she learns that they are actually werewolves and they needed a 4th person in their pack to be able to properly dispose of the bodies of the men that they kill. So for these werewolves, they have no choice but to feed on the full moon, otherwise the hunger will drive them crazy. So how they go about choosing the men that they kill is that they go to like some kind of party or something like that, and they try and bait men into assaulting them. So they'll like kind of lead them on and bring them to a dark corner, and if they end up taking the bait and trying to assault them, then they kill them and eat them. So it was definitely like a very thought-provoking kind of thing, and like definitely look up trigger warnings for it as well. But overall this was a pretty solid read. I gave it 3.5 stars. The art style was just incredible. There's also a sapphic romance between the main character and somebody else, which I really enjoyed, and this one was so diverse as well. There were side characters from all different backgrounds and like different body types present. There was also a teacher who used neutral titles who ended up being called Mr. or Miss. They were called Mix, which I had never seen before in a book, and I really appreciated that. That was awesome to see. So overall, like a pretty solid read. I just found the plot to be kind of predictable and like pretty standard werewolf stuff. So it wasn't like my favorite thing. I'm also just like not that interested in werewolves in general. They're like my least favorite kind of paranormal fantasy thing. So they're not my personal favorite, but I still enjoyed this one and I would definitely recommend it. And then the last book that I read in October was The Monster of Ellenhaven by Jennifer Giesbrecht. This one is a adult horror novella. It's about this monster who has been lurking the town of Elendhaven, which seems like it's like some German European inspired town, but this town has been wrecked by plague for decades, and obviously the monster is this demon thing, so he loves all the carnage and chaos and actively tries to make it worse. And then he meets the sorcerer who also wants revenge on the town and is trying to bring the plague back just to fuck with people, and so the monster and the sorcerer team up and just become this evil duo. So this one was really gross. There's a lot of like disgusting descriptions of like death and decay and a lot of body horror, so definitely look out for that if you're going to read this one. But it was also weirdly humorous too. The monster Johann was hilarious, and he had no business being that funny given the kind of creature that he is, but he was always cracking these like really witty comments and very dry, dark humor, which is my shit. I love that. So I was laughing several times throughout this book. It was a really interesting kind of thing because he would be making jokes about like the people that he was killing, and it's like, I shouldn't be laughing at this because obviously like this is terrible, but you just couldn't help but laugh at the jokes that he was making, and it was a weird experience. So overall, this wasn't like my favorite thing ever, but I did still enjoy it. I gave it 3 stars, and yeah, it was like a weirdly good time. I don't think I would ever like reread it, but I enjoyed it while I was there. Alright, and those are all the books that I read in October. I am still reading one. I'm reading Blood and Honey right now by Shelby Mahurin. I started it in like the last week and I have not finished it yet. It's taking me so long to get through this book, so that one will be included in my November wrap up if I actually end up finishing it. I am enjoying it. I just really struggle with like chunky books. But anyways, let me know what the best thing that you read in October was. I would love to hear your thoughts. But in the meantime, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye!